I'm dead
Let's get these jabronis out the way with their silly questions before they get to people's elbow. So I'm curious, right? I'm probably gonna say this wrong, and I'm gonna say this with the Spanish accent of Latin America. Hey yo, you identify as Garifuna American? I thought it was. I never. Well, I looked up the Garifuna stuff, but you probably know it way better than me because my Google degree is not going to do justice. So I don't know if you want. I would be. I want to hear a little bit more about that.
Yeah. So my family is Garifuna. I mean, that is the way you pronounce it. Is definitely like Spanish way. It's also Garifuna. People have say it in with different accents in different way, but essentially we're Afro-Indigenous. So basically it's kind of a long story, but essentially how the narrative goes is that there was an intent to have, as with enslavement, intent to have folks enslaved, and en route, the boat was shipwrecked off the coast of St. Vincent. And in St. Vincent, you have West Africans, essentially mixing with Carib, and, Black Carib came to be, which is Black Carib is essentially Garifuna. Because of colonization, right? French had St. Vincent, the British essentially had St. Vincent, and there was always fighting with the Garifuna because we were able to essentially create a stronghold, and the hope was to enslave, but that never did happen. But we were exiled from St. Vincent, and through those travels, and this is where the story differs, and even that what I'm sharing with you right now is what is recognized oftentimes online and in academia, but there are also other variations. So I do want to say that this is the story that often gets discussed, but there's variations where, it wasn't even going to be the thought of enslavement. We just already existed in these lands, as well as the fact that we were sent to, before reaching Central America, we were sent elsewhere and then made it to the Caribbean coast of Central America, first starting with Roatan, and then migrating to mainland Honduras, Guatemala, Nicaragua, and Belize. So even though my family is Garifuna from Honduras, you will see us in those countries that I just named. Furthermore, we speak a specific language. I personally am not fluent in that language, but I grew up with it. My parents speak it to each other. So like a typical I always say I'm 1.5 gen-ish, because I don't really feel like I'm second gen, but I am probably. But in either case, I grew up with hearing the language and understand, like my grandmother, my mom spoke it to my grandmother, like everybody in my family spoke it. It was just like, for example, in our immediate home, me, my brother, and my cousins, like we would hear it all the time, but we personally didn't speak it fluently. And actually what people don't realize is that is literally our language. So my parents, for example, my mom, she even said it, like her Spanish was never really, like her Spanish is good, but that wasn't the language that, my grandparents spoke to her. Like that was the first language was Garifuna. And similarly with my father and my grandparents, like that was the language. And then ultimately Spanish usually came through education or through, having to you had to work, right? So you had to learn the language of the place that you were at. But what's interesting being in the Bronx is that we have the largest, well, it's really New York City, but I'm going to say the Bronx because there's literally so many of us in the Bronx, having the largest population outside of Central America. So though we're there again on the Caribbean coast, we're also like in New York, Houston, Cali, New Orleans, Chicago. There's really like some strongholds where the Garifuna community is. and it's a very beautiful culture. I know I'm biased, but like to be able all these years to maintain the language, right? And this language is not, it's now written, but literally like this is something that I shouldn't say just recently, because there's like early texts that you can find that are written in certain dictionaries that were used really for traders who wanted to like trade with like in St. Vincent and different places, that there's early documentation of the language. But really in terms of like its current state, I would say it's not in, it hasn't been until the last like 20, 30 years that you can actually find versions of it written. And it differs. You can see in Belize, there's certain, the way I think because Belize is English is like the dominant language there. And then the rest of, Central America, where you find Garifuna people, Garinagu really is it in plural, it's, you can tell there's a difference in certain words, like certain like letters might get cut off. And so that happens when you are talking about like an oral language, something that has not been like well documented for generations. So I know that's a lot. That's actually somewhat of the abbreviated version. I definitely include a more, I guess, thorough sort of version in the chapter that I wrote in Wild Tongues Can't Be Tamed. But yeah, very proud to be Garifuna.